The following is rated not safe for work. It contains strong language, adult situations, and lots of spoilers. Discretion is advised.
In the criminal justice system, cinematic-based offenses are considered especially heinous. The dedicated attorneys who investigate these villainous films are members of an elite squad known as the Reels of Justice. These are their stories.
Order, please, order. The Reels of Justice is now in session. Judge Maynard Bangs, Judge Big Ben Haslar, Judge Dylan J. Schlender, and Judge Even a Broken Clock is right twice a day. Ryan Luis Rodriguez presiding. Your eyes for the Honorable Judge. Will everybody?
Be seated. Welcome to the Appeals of Justice.
What?
The Appeals of Justice, that's right. For our Season 3 finale, we decided to finally cave to the immense pressure from our millions of fans around the world and revisit some of our previous decisions, taking in new evidence into consideration, hopefully, and determining whether the verdict for that case should be overturned or upheld. Bailiff, what do we have first?
The first on the docket is ROJ-11, The People vs. Dark Phoenix. Set in 1992, this 2019 superhero film details the descent into villainy of veteran X-Man Jean Grey after a mysterious celestial energy imbues her with amplified, albeit uncontrollable powers. The court previously rendered a verdict of not guilty.
Oh, Jean Grey, not Jane Grey, as some people might think. You are representing the prosecution, Mr. Big Ben Haslar. You may present your first exhibit.
Your Honors, thank you for hearing my case and for your open hearts and minds in righting the wrongs in the criminal justice system. Though not the first incorrect decision this court has made, that would be Jason Takes Manhattan.
Not the last either.
In August 2020, the court had ruled that the X-Men film Dark Phoenix was also not guilty of being a bad movie, which ever since has opened up a torrent of civil just head-scratchers, such as when you compare it to other films. How can we live in a world where Solo, Superman Returns, Hateful Eight are bad movies, yet this one is somehow fine? In comparison, it doesn't add up. In that trial, the case led by Prosecutor Schlender managed to get the court to acquiesce that the film was at least meh and not good, basing his case on the fact that the film was bereft of any meaning. And I would like to remind the court of these facts. The film sets itself up to say things about loss and parental figures and the search for their replacements, but really only does so in order to set up the next scene. She caused her mother to die in a car wreck, which causes her father to hand her off to Xavier. Xavier blocks her trauma in her mind with telepathy, causing her to talk to Mystique. Mystique is killed off early because J-Law is too expensive, I guess, which sends her to Magneto. Magneto rejects her because he's worried about the attention she's receiving, and that might hurt the mutants in his commune of Genosha, causing her to finally go to the alien Vuk, played by Jessica Chastain, who's really just interested in her newly found Phoenix powers. At no point is the essential theme really examined or any messages conveyed. It has no reason to exist other than to make another X-Men film. It's vacuous. You walk away learning nothing and feeling very little about any of the characters. The tent poles for emotional impact are there, but none are expounded upon. The prosecutor also went into detail about how ludicrous this scene that takes place in the vacuum of space is, and the defense hand-waved it away with explanations of something, who knows how superpowers really work. Now, to get this movie from meh to bad, I would like to expand on this exhibit in a few more ways to the record. Okay. The Phoenix Saga is an inherently cosmic story, told over a long period of time, ranging from the Phoenix Saga to the Dark Phoenix Saga, and being told in a cinematic series that hadn't ventured into space yet. And it's also compressing this into 2 hours. X-Men 3 faced similar problems as well, and tackled it in much the same way, by having Jean dealing with mental blocks. This creates a problem when they do go into space early on in this film to return to Earth for the whole rest of it, while in an alternate timeline, Jean is apparently just as powerful without this Phoenix Force. So there are 3 problems that this added to the story. 1, it doesn't resemble the original beats. 2, it skips over any real context. And 3, it disrupts its own canon. I might add a footnote that there are plenty other X-Men stories that they could tell, but they keep shooting themselves in the foot twice by focusing on this one. I would also like to bring to the court's attention that this film suffered a troubled production, which is sad, sure, but it doesn't excuse shoddy storytelling. They originally had planned out a Phoenix movie centered out around Dark Phoenix, which is great. That's the right call. By spreading it out over multiple films. But they scrapped that plan when the Phoenix one, the first one, too closely represented Captain Marvel, which was already in production by their newly acquired business daddy. So too did they shoot out the Skrulls and in the aforementioned film. So that was stipulated in the original trial, and this caused them to swerve. Instead, they used the Dabari, which isn't a race in the Alien comics, I'll grant you, but they aren't a race of shapeshifters. Those are Skrulls. And lastly, Your Honor, I'd like to point out that this misses the point of the thesis of X-Men, which is that the group protects a world that hates and fears them. This theme is echoed in the previous films, but in this one, the president has a friggin' X-phone on his desk, and the X-Men return to humans cheering them on. They do this... Well, I'm not really sure why. Humans do go back to hating them towards the end of the film, but there's no nuance to this, nor does it really factor into the plot. It easily could have been humans hating them throughout the film, but perhaps that would give Xavier less to do. My thought is that this was meant to be a gradual shift throughout the planned trilogy, but they did so poorly with the trouble production that it never got kicked off, that they had to compress it. And so now we are at X-Men 10, essentially, which is like every franchise that has survived too long, has risen, fallen, reinvented itself, and eventually lost the plot entirely. Thank you, Your Honors.
Now,
if I could kick things off,
go ahead.
Obviously, I did prosecute the case, but in the interest of being
a lawyer that looked very much like you.
In the interest of being a fair judge, isn't there a certain level of sincerity and authenticity to Dark Phoenix that we really don't see in superhero movies nowadays? All these years removed from it, I think we're seeing a movie that's at least taking itself seriously and isn't just a quip fest, So does that count for anything?
I wouldn't say that it does. It would if it actually said something. If you're going to have a film that's quippy, that's fine, it's lighthearted, but if you don't have that, you need to say something. You need to have something to reflect on. It needs to imbue something on you. And I would suggest that that's true of the quippy ones too, but it's a little less needed there, because then when you're sitting in this theater for 2 hours, just you're not laughing, you're just getting a story that means nothing. I don't think that applies to this film, Your Honor.
Well, as you described earlier in your testimony, this seems to be Jean's search for family.
Yes, but what does it say on that issue? Nothing at all. She just moves from person to person to person. So if there's any sort of message, it's that, hey, don't trust a parent. they'll just abandon you. There's no turnarounds.
That's a valuable lesson.
Well, there's no dramatic arc in that story, right? It's just she eventually just ends up with Vuk, who she just beats, and that's it.
Well, I'm Vuku for Voco Puffs. Now, could the Dabari secretly be Skrulls masquerading as Dabari?
You're on thin ice, fellow Honor.
I don't know what the point of that would be.
Well, the Skrulls don't want you to know they're Skrulls, right?
Well, in this universe, nobody knows Skrulls. In the X-Men universe, nobody knows them. So what point would saying, hey, we're someone else do?
Lead off suspicion. Ryan, any questions from you from the bench?
Is this better or worse than X-Men The Last Stand?
Well, they're both aiming for different things. I would say that X-Men The Last Stand at least has a better cast that sort of interacts with each other a little bit better. But the story, the X-Men 3 has the Cure story, which works to its favor. The Dark Phoenix story does not. So if we're comparing Dark Phoenix to Dark Phoenix, I'd say it's about the same. But some of those other elements in X-Men 3 might lift it up a bit, although I would suggest that film is still guilty.
The Cure being one of the greatest X-Men storylines in the comics. The Cure is one of the best. It's written by Joss Whedon, one of the best X-Men storylines. And to put it up against Dark Phoenix is a weird kind of like mishmash. But without that, I don't know what you have here.
Yes, agreed. X-Men 3 isn't on trial, but yeah, when you combine those two, Dark Phoenix and the Cure, Dark Phoenix takes so much time to tell, and even in 2 hours, this story this movie can't really tell it to its completion. It has none of the meaning that the other one does, because it was spread over like years in the comic books, and even the show had to spend like 5 episodes on each saga to really encapsulate it. This movie brushes all of that aside. The Phoenix Force has no meaning. It's just this thing drifting off in space. It gives her uncontrollable powers, which apparently she already had in an alternate timeline, so it adds nothing.
Now, here's another thing. Talking about you mentioned the cast. We do have Michael Fassbender and McAvoy in this, who are very strong actors, not only...
And Jessica Chastain.
And Jessica Chastain, yeah. Not only in the previous X-Men movies, is why I mentioned those two specifically, but obviously in their broader work, Split, for example, for McAvoy is very good in that. So don't they do enough to elevate this movie out of, into like not bad?
Well, this is true. They are fantastic actors, and at this point, they've portrayed these characters 4 times, so that they can do this role in their sleep. The problem, I think McAvoy's fine in this movie, so you can have a good performance in a bad movie. Fassbender is not in the movie enough to validate his presence. He shows up literally halfway through. And that's just because, hey, we're pretty sure people will show up in the theaters for him. He has no arc in this story like he does in the previous ones. So his presence there is meaningless. Jennifer Lawrence, same thing. In fact, Jennifer Lawrence is even weirder. This is a problem that they've inherited from the previous X-Men films, but Mystique is not a leader of the X-Men. So it's just because of her prominence as an actor in the field that they elevate her to this stance. Jessica Chastain, great actor. I really don't think her character gives her anything to work with. She's very stern in this film, and that's it. Like there's no arc other than, hey, I want to have the Phoenix powers, and I came in contact with the Phoenix and I died. The end. I can't think of any scene where I feel for this character in any way, like hatred or love.
And would you say, the character is not dead in the original X-Men movies? She's very much still alive. Right. And so killing her in the 1990s presents a weird dilemma. So how is this person
Well, this
alive?
is an alternate timeline, Your Honor. I'll stipulate this is an alternate timeline from Days of Future Past. It's whether Mystique killed Trask or not that created this alternate timeline that we're in that contains Apocalypse and Dark Phoenix. But given that she's still alive, it's still dumb because like her Phoenix Force is like flying in the sky, and apparently nobody notices like these blips of Firebird showing up across Paris. Like no one's commenting, no one's looking up. It's just Tuesday to them.
How about the action set pieces? I remember the train scene being really wonderful.
Yes,
that's a great climactic scene.
Like you actually remember it, or you just
Magneto lifts a whole train?
Well, okay, train scenes, they're fine, but you've seen them before. You've seen them in Spider-Man. You've seen them in so many action films. Like how many, they could probably do an Incinerator episode on movies that have train fights in them. So yeah, it's done fine, but it's nothing new.
We should.
And by the time we get there, if you're going to have your final battle, you need to have some meaning to it. And I say that there is none in this train fight. It's just, hey, there's a cool effect. And if you're in it just for that, then fine, I guess, but I don't think it makes the whole journey of sitting there for an hour and 45 minutes worth it.
Well, any other further questions before we render a verdict?
I think I've heard enough.
Okay.
How about you, Ryan Luis Rodriguez?
I'm satisfied.
All right. So how do we rule? Dylan, I'll let you go first.
All right. I appreciate Ben bringing this case back to our attention. Having listened to it again, I thought it was a well-presented case from the defense at the time. I thought it was a well-prosecuted case as well, obviously. And, I think the arc of history is going to look at Dark Phoenix a little more favorably, but not today. So I am going to rule that we should find it guilty now in the appeals of justice.
Ryan?
I kind of hate this movie. I don't think it's going to be looked upon favorably ever because it's garbage.
The way superhero movies are going now.
Well, yeah. But still, it's garbage. And it's my fault that it was found innocent in the first place because I felt really bad.
So we're in an alternate timeline where you get to time travel back and fix your mistakes.
Yes, exactly. That's what I'm doing, Ben. I am rectifying one of society's greatest mistakes in letting this film go off unscathed. So I'm going to go guilty.
All right.
And the Honorable Maynard Bangs.
Well, I am kind of where you are, Shlonzo. I think that there is a time where this is going to look more favorably, mainly for the cast. I think that we won't see McAvoy and like Fassbender in these roles forever, and so that we'll be just looking back with a lot of nostalgia over them. And kind of my feelings for the film are sort of the same time as the first. I think it's very mediocre. I don't think it does anything really well, but it's kind of such a blah sandwich. I'm not sure it does anything that bad. So I'm going to stay with my not guilty, but it doesn't need to be unanimous. So then it is official. The decision in ROJ-011, The People versus Dark Phoenix, has been overturned. Dark Phoenix is found guilty of being a bad movie.
Yay!
All right. Hey, this is fun.
Bailiff, we will now hear the next case.
Next, we have ROJ-16, The People vs. Showgirls. This 1995 erotic drama film, directed by Paul Verhoeven, tells the story of Nomi, a Las Vegas stripper who ascends to the heights of Vegas showgirl circuit at the expense of those around her and maybe even her own soul. The court previously rendered a verdict of guilty.
Can you say erotic for me one more time?
Erotic.
You're really crushing it on those R's, I gotta tell you.
Wow,
doing outstanding with the R's.
Mr. Dylan J. Schlender, you are representing the defense. You may proceed with your first exhibit.
Thank you, Your Honors. As I stand here, I am fondly recalling our Sweet 16 spectacular.
A long ago.
What a spectacle it was. While the episode came out incredibly polished, thanks in no small part to our master editor, Rob Maynard, it has been one I was always reluctant to revisit. You see, I love Showgirls. And to accommodate...
What about the movie?
Yeah, well, we're getting to that, Your Honor. And to accommodate the grand scale of that particular episode, I was relegated, thank you, Ryan, to prosecution. So now, with the passage of time, I have revisited that episode, and the stress that surrounded the production is no longer there. And I have to say, gentlemen, we put on one hell of a show. One hell of a show. It's still our longest episode to date. However...
It always will be.
God willing. However, it was an interesting case, for we had not only special guests, but special guest jurors who served very well and did their job. But it put us in a strange position of Ryan Luis Rodriguez and Maynard Bangs not being able to render a verdict from the jury, though we did get to hear their thoughts later in the episode. And then, of course, I had to take an adversarial role in prosecuting the film. So there is a timeline out there where it could have been me, Maynard, and Ryan in that jury, and this would have been a unanimous not guilty, I hope. So tonight, I would like to expand on some of the arguments that were made by both the prosecutor and the defense in that show. The thrust of the case around Showgirls was how to view it, how not how to physically watch it, but how do we interpret it? And as you listen to the case, you will hear me prosecuting it, accept it as satire. And the judge repeatedly asking questions of whether the movie was intended to be sexy. Because you see, it is so often misinterpreted as failed smut. That is to say, Showgirls is misinterpreted as failed smut. So I contended that there was indeed a failure here, but the failure wasn't because it was trying to be smut. It was because Verhoeven and Joe Esterhazy, the director and writer, respectfully, wanted to make a satire about the exploitation of women, but instead of holding up a mirror to society, all they did was expose themselves. I like this argument because it found purchase in the jury. One jury even comparing the film to two 14-year-old boys playing with Barbie dolls. And I do believe that is true. And I presented it as a demerit. But in all honesty, I think it is actually an argument in favor of the movie being good, or at least, and again, this is the standard for Reels of Justice, not bad. Verhoeven and Esterhaus ultimately succeeded in their vision, but in such a meta and oblivious way. The only parallel in art that comes close that I could think is Alan Moore's, ironically in this case, named Rorschach character. But even then, this is leagues above that. So Showgirls, as a cultural artifact, is singular. You have to wonder if something like that could ever be made again. And this, keep in mind, was made. It was crafted. Verhoeven is too deliberate. His oeuvre too clear for Showgirls to be an outlier. His political commentary in films like Starship Troopers and RoboCop is very clear. But when it comes to the, quote, smut, it is not so easy to watch. It is not as palatable to take in, but that doesn't mean it's not there. In my case, I mentioned abjection, which is, being subjected and viewing uncomfortable things is one way of looking at it. And that was, of course, in relation to the very controversial rape scene that we have at the end of the movie. And one of the reasons it's so controversial is its complete lack of subtlety. I mean, this is important. Take a minute to Google Andrew Carver and look at him next to Joe Esterhaus. Add in that Carver was just committing the violence and actually watching the rape. And we see Verhoeven seemingly teasing Esterhaus. He's saying, look at what you are doing, Joe. But at the same time, he is gleefully filming it all. This lack of self-awareness gives us pure, distilled honesty. It is not broadly applicable outside of these two men, but it is hard to think of a more honest film that exists out there. So if I could put on my snootiest of hats and turn up my nose as high as possible, please do not like Showgirls because it is, quote, camp, or because it is, quote, so bad it's good, or that is a, quote, masterpiece of shit. The film is much more than that. It is more than it was meant to be, and to like it, ironically, denies so much of the depth it shows. You could still have fun while watching it, but just know we are seeing something exquisitely unique. There is something here. It doesn't suck.
Dylan using his NPR voice. I love it.
I've been practicing. This is an important case for me. I'm ready to handle all questions or comments.
I have many. So is it your contention that Verhoeven sabotaged this film to get at his co-writer?
I don't think it was full-on sabotage. Now, in the case, that's what I claimed because I was prosecuting. But I think it was Verhoeven being classic Verhoeven. He's very much a trickster. He likes doing these kind of winks and nods in very vulgar ways. You see it in almost all of his work, and this idea that he wouldn't do it in Showgirls, I find to be impossible. So I think he took a shot at Esterhaus, and in a way, it could look like sabotage just because so many people didn't get it, but it was very intentional. And funny enough, you just don't see a lot of people drawing this Andrew Carver, Joe Esterhaus comparison. People kind of did when the movie first came out, but in its reappraisal, people leave it off, and I think it's actually a very important piece of what makes this movie good.
Now, I know that Verhoeven is a noted satirist with, as you mentioned, RoboCop and Starship Troopers, but being a satirist occasionally does not necessarily make you a full-time satirist. It does not mean that everything that you make has elements of satire in it, so please elucidate me as to the satirical elements of the film.
Okay, so what they were trying to do was, so they're using Vegas as a stand-in for basically like Hollywood or any organization that could use up women, right? And by directing the movie the way he did, by having Nomi's character act the way she did with these crazy over-the-top performances, which he said every time were always deliberate choices. So it wasn't that Berkeley was acting poorly. She was acting as directed. And that is part of the exploitation, is that they were using a character, an actress like her, who was previously famous from Saved by the Bell, and putting her in these situations where she's naked, she's dancing, as they say in the movie, he's like, you're not dancing, that's fucking, it's this idea of using sex in a way that denies women agency, right? Because what they keep trying to go back to is this idea, and they say it a lot in the movie, is being a whore, right? I mean, in the very first, one of the first scenes, a guy basically spells out the movie in one line when he says, you're going to have to sell it eventually. So what this movie is focusing on is how women are treated in those organizations. But what makes this one incredibly honest is that Verhoeven isn't exposing anything but himself and Esterhazy. They are the perpetrators, even though they may not see themselves that way, or at least they don't see themselves as guilty as the characters they're portraying on the screen.
Well, Mr. Schlender, wouldn't that not go with the intention of the film? Like, we measure a film whether it's successful at what it intended to do, and you're kind of saying that Verhoeven and Esterhazy are sort of oblivious to what they did, meaning the film didn't meet its intention.
No, but it did meet its intention. That's what's so crazy about it, and that's why this works so well. Is they thought they were holding a mirror up on society. They were really holding a mirror up on themselves. So they wanted to make a movie showing about how sex is exploitive, how it's, there's the old saying, everything's about sex is about power. That's basically the thesis statement of this movie, but they don't realize that they're the ones perpetrating it. And so their intention was to expose that. They thought they were exposing it for everyone else in society, but they were really exposing themselves. And by doing so, have presented a very powerful message and a powerful product. So yes, they backed into it, but they did park the car.
Backed into it. Get it, everybody?
Yes, you see.
Your contention
Frankenstein
is that it's serious.
Away. Oh yes,
your contention is that it's failed satire, but that it works because it was accidental.
No, but I don't think it's failed either. I think they ended up giving away more of themselves than they thought they were. I thought they were oblivious to kind of how smart the thing they were making was. It's like the scientist who creates the first super AI. It's going to be bigger and better than them and the pieces that went into it.
And we're going to use it to make commercials. Any additional questions?
I want to hear from you, Rob.
I don't know if I deliberately have I'm skeptical of some of the things said. I think they're holding up a mirror to society, and it just so happens that Verhoeven and Esterhazy are in the mirror too.
It's like a two-way mirror, but they're behind it.
They're in the foreground of the mirror. The rest of society is behind them. Like the way Nomi is exploited and really belittled and only valued throughout this film for her sexual appeal, I do think is a parallel to a lot of women in the entertainment industry. And she doesn't realize that she's being used so limitedly. It ends up giving her power. But ultimately it's not really her power to wield, or it's a temporary power that can be taken away. I do think the film is strong for the way it ends too, because she does take back her agency by the end.
Well, what she does in the end is, and see, this is why it's a better mirror on Verhoeven than it is on society writ large, is because of how intrinsically tied violence is into his portrayal of sex. I think anyone who's watching this movie doesn't think these scenes are sexy. They don't think Berkeley is moving like, she doesn't look hot in the pool when she's with Kyle MacLachlan, right? And then at the end, what does she do? She exacts physical revenge by beating up Andrew Carver, who, again, actually didn't even rape her friend. He was there. He punched her. Again,
he facilitates it.
Violence. Well, again, yes, but it's all about violence. And that's where Verhoeven really exposes himself, is this idea that sex and violence are entwined, which I don't think is reflected in society so much as it is from his own head.
In the original trial, though, you said that the rape scene has no justification. Are you saying now that it does?
Well, I was prosecuting it at the time, and I think the purpose for the rape scene is for Verhoeven to kind of stick a thumb in the eye of Esterhaus at the end of the day. I think it's also to imply that Esterhaus might even be a little impotent because, again, Carver's not the one actually engaging in the rape. He's just punching her in the face, right? So I do think this movie would be just as strong without it. And I think the reason it's in there is to remove any of the subtlety that may be lingering. But at that point in the movie, there really isn't anything subtle about it. But people were still interpreting this as a smutty movie. And so a lot of the objections to the rape scene came. It's like, well, like, this isn't sexy. It's like, well, none of it's been sexy. It's all been real, So it's a fine line when you're talking about rape in movies. It's very hard to present in a way that's palatable. And if it is going to be presented, it shouldn't be palatable. It should be hard to watch.
It shouldn't be palatable. Yeah, I would agree.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Are you guys ready to rule?
I suppose.
All right. Big Ben, you want to go first?
Well, I can't go as far as to say that this is a good film, and I'm kind of surprised that the attorney before us might suggest that it is. It definitely falls short of that. I do think it's a film that sort of succeeds recently on a reappraisal. It sort of succeeds in spite of itself. It is sort of an affront, like where everything's all glitzy and glamorous, but there's this very ugly thing beneath it, how people use their sex to advance themselves. I think that there's something there, but it's not good. I think it's just north of bad, though. So I will rule not guilty.
Ryan.
Well, this will be my first time actually casting judgment on this film, since I was not part of the Sweet 16, as we now call it, even though recording it was nothing sweet whatsoever.
Oh,
it was a technical nightmare.
It was an important episode to revisit. I'm glad we have it on the appeals show.
I didn't rewatch this movie. I watched it for that episode, which seems like kind of a waste in retrospect. But I've never been a big fan of this movie, but I've come around to it being a satire. Because I remember when Dylan said that he was going to do this case, we actually had an argument over whether or not it's satire. And for the longest time, I maintained that I had a point and that it wasn't, but I've slowly come around to the fact that it is. I don't think that it entirely is, but I think that it meets at least the bare minimum of satirical intent. And this is definitely one that needs a little bit of rehabilitation. So I'm actually going to go not guilty.
All right. I didn't have a lot of questions because I've talked about this movie a lot. I definitely think it's a satire because mainly I think Verhoeven is just too deliberate in what he makes. I just don't, this idea that it's just like smutty softcore porn is just, it's not there to me on the screen, right? Because I agree. Nothing really that happens in this movie is sexy. It is about sex weaponized for and against women. I don't think I can go where Mr. Schlender goes, that this is just accidentally exposing Verhoeven and Esterhaus, because I don't think they're guilty of anything more than the rest of Hollywood or the rest of entertainment in general. I think they're in the mirror too. It's about everybody, and they happen to catch themselves in the mirror. But I think there's so much to talk about this film. There's a ton of layers, and I think a lot of them are deliberate. And I think anything that has that much content and can inspire that much conversation and thought and theory has some meat on the bone. So I'm going to go not guilty. So the decision for ROJ-253, The People versus Showgirls, has been overturned. Showgirls is found not guilty of being a bad movie.
Hooray!
One of these people have to lose out. Come on.
Bailiff, we are ready.
Unanimous across the board.
We are ready to hear the next case.
The next case is ROJ-253, The People vs. Ticks, a 1993 creature feature that follows a group of troubled youths on a forest retreat where they encounter giant ticks and murderous marijuana-soaked hillbillies. The court previously rendered a verdict of guilty.
Marijuana. Oh, God, that's one of the best things I've ever come up with.
Marijuana-soaked. Yes, my God. That takes us back, doesn't it? Thank you, bailiff. Mr. Maynard Bangs, you are representing the defense. You may proceed with your first exhibit.
Yeah, I'd like to bring up a couple of pieces of evidence that I think weren't entered into at the time. I actually acted as prosecutor at that time, and I know that our defense was court appointed, so there may not have been, as much interest in some of these other aspects of the film, and some of it has also just come to my attention. Now, when we first examined this film, I suggested that the marijuana farmers, Jerry and Sir, who operate out of the wilderness, seemed very out of place and kind of random. But since then, I've learned about the extensive history of illegal marijuana farming in California, and would like to suggest to the court this is actually a very excellent background for this story to occur, and that the characters of Jerry and Sir are actually timely and relevant in that region. Now, the illicit growing of marijuana in California, it really started to boom in the 70s when the U.S. government sprayed marijuana fields in Mexico with an herbicide called paraquat. This increased the demand for non-contaminated sources of reefer, and along with the advent of many new growing techniques to increase potency, California found itself in a bit of what we might call a proto-green rush. By 1979, 35% of cannabis consumed in California was grown in-state. And these farmers were not only reclusive, but incredibly dangerous, as the farmers depicted in this film are shown to be. I'd like to bring to the court's attention the Hulu documentary Sasquatch, which follows investigative journalist David Holthouse's time working in the infamous Emerald Triangle in California, the largest cannabis-producing region in the United States. Now, where this film exactly takes place in California isn't made abundantly clear, but I do think that it's fair to assume that it's near or around the Emerald Triangle. Now, in 1993, the documentary takes place exactly around the time Ticks was made, and Holthouse visited the region and heard a story about 3 legal pot farmer workers being torn limb from limb by Sasquatch. The documentary essentially goes on to hypothesize that these workers were actually murdered by rival pot growers. And this demonstrates exactly how dangerous the types of people that the characters Jerry and Sir are based on can be. So I think that makes the time, place, and circumstances of this film very relevant to when it was made, providing almost a time capsule of the kind of criminal activities happening in California at that time. Now, the other piece of evidence I'd like to submit is the practical effect work done by Doug Beswick. I know it was brought up a little bit in deliberation, but not entered really entirely into evidence. Doug is probably best known for his makeup work on 1977 Star Wars or his stop motion work in Empire Strikes Back. He also worked on the mechanical special effects in Aliens and Ghostbusters and countless more. This is a special effects master at his peak, flexing his ability to bring creatures to life on the big screen using practical animatronic effects. This movie is a special effects film from the ground up. Beswick actually wrote the original screenplay for the film a couple decades earlier. So from its very conception, this film was a creature feature with a focus on the execution of the creatures. Now, this court has seen a few creature features pass through its doors. Grizzly with its spliced-in stock footage of a bear, or Congo with its killer ape suits it was too embarrassed to even let the audience see, or Rawhead Rex with its giant rubber suit that it should have been too embarrassed to let the audience see. We really held against these films that they were creature features where their weaknesses were the creatures themselves. Now, Ticks is a creature feature where its greatest strength is the design and execution of the creature. And that's what you're there for. Is the story a little flat? Sure. Some people go out to the woods, they run into weed farmers and mutated ticks. It wasn't made for the story. It was made because they knew they could make some kick-ass animatronic critters. They had the ability, they had the resources, and they did it. And as a lover of creature features, as a lover of practical effects, and as the man who originally prosecuted this film successfully, it pains me. It keeps me up at night. It tasks me to know that I condemned a film with such excellent practical effect work. because we'll never see a movie like this again in our lifetime. Creature features now are all CGI, AI generated, voiced by Benedict Cumberbatch. This film is a relic of a bygone era, an era where bringing something imaginative and monstrous to life on screen, something you know you can feel and touch, something with weight and dimension, that was enough. That's what the audience was there for. And again, that era is long gone. And I want to appreciate works like this when masters of the craft were free and able to practice their art. So I hope that the court will reconsider its decision and find in favor of this film for its awesome and now endangered practical effects. But in the least, I'm glad I could speak up for the little guys when no one else dared to. Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Maynard, so your contention is that it's good because the practical effects are great, and okay, I will grant you that. But there's a lot of bad films that look very good. A lot of the ones today are made with CGI to their detriment. So, are you saying that just the fact that it's like practical and there's it's a craft that we as cinephiles tend to love more elevates it to not guilty?
Yes, I do. I think that's because that practical effect work is sort of a lost art. It's not something that we see anymore. That the examples we have, especially the examples that are better. I mean, there's a lot of stop motion, right? A lot of it's trash. Even Laser Blast isn't that bad, but it makes you appreciate films that Harryhausen did more. And Bestwick does great animatronic work throughout this film, and I think that is enough to raise it above a ho-hum story, but is enough, especially because it's just such a rare thing to see, one that we'll never see again.
Now, you pointed out that the backstory involving marijuana farmers, that we didn't really learn about that until the 90s, but he wrote the script 20 years beforehand. So how are the two on the same plane?
No, so the first boom of the California growing was in the 70s. And that was when the government had sprayed the Mexican pot fields, as I'd mentioned, with the herbicide. So from the 70s, a lot of this illicit growing was happening in the Emerald Triangle. So
did we know about it?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, people knew that things were growing. People were buying things. I'm sure the government was trying to find it. I don't know if I don't think they had coordinates.
Not to step on you, Maynard. I think the confusion from Ryan is you said the documentary was from 93. It was about 90.
Oh, yeah. No, the documentary is on Hulu, and it was made 3 or 4 years ago about an incident that happened in the Emerald Triangle in 1993 that seemed to suggest basically gang activity between rival pot farmers.
At least I think that's where the confusion was coming from. If I'm wrong, Ryan, just
no, you got it.
Oh, okay, yeah.
My bad.
Yeah. The documentary
came out in 93.
Yeah,
it makes sense.
No, it was an investigative. Well, I mean, there certainly was. Again, that was an investigative journalist that went down to the pot farm in 93. So these things were getting media attention as a problem, as a growing industry. And so I'm just saying that using that as a setting for your creature feature film, I think makes it very interesting. I didn't see that documentary until after we did the case for ticks, and I was kind of unaware of the history of the Emerald Triangle and everything that had gone in there. And when we watched the documentary,
and
I was like,
violent it was, right?
Exactly. Jesus. How violent it was. I was like, holy crap, this is where ticks basically happens. And
same looking people too, just with blurry faces in the documentary.
Yeah, they all look like Clint Howard.
It's a terrible medical condition to have a blurry face.
I can vouch for what Maynard's saying because I watched that documentary with him, and that was the first thing we said. We're like, "Oh my god, Tix was right."
Tix was right, and I just thought that Maynard, that was a smart core idea at Tix.
No, I agree with that, but I can't let you escape something that you brought up in the case, which was a very salient point in your prosecution. Is that ticks are less scary the bigger they are. Ticks are scary because they bite you and you don't know it. They lay in wait for you. They don't hunt you. How can you address this?
I can't. It's a great point from a brilliant prosecutor. And
to follow up on that point, you said that ticks are hard to squash, and yet they squash them very easily in this film.
Another big problem. Absolutely. I think the reason this was picked to be ticks was simply that ticks haven't been done. And I think that was the idea of, we've done spiders, we've done scorpions, what's left? And someone was like, ticks. And they made them big. It's an irrational choice, but it's also the only time you'll ever see big giant ticks on the screen. And so I think it's fair to give those little arachnids a little bit of a boost. But you're right, they're way less effective the bigger they are. The only thing that's nice in this case is that they have the hallucinogenic bite, which adds additional problems to everyone's day as they're trying to make through this film. So they kind of get that extra power from being mutated. That gives them a little bit more of a challenge. But yeah, the film has to jump over barrels to get to this point where ticks are big and moving and coming after you. It's very contrived. But there's, what other way are you going to have animatronic ticks? Someone wanted to build animatronic ticks. That's what this movie's about. Doug Beswick wanted to build animatic ticks. He didn't care what he had to do to make it happen.
You can do like a Honey, I Lost the Kids or Shrunk the Kids.
All right.
You still have the same problem.
Gentlemen, do we have any more questions for Maynard?
I have a few more. The other problems you leveled against the film were that the characters have no real backstory that's ever really capitalized, and also that Clint Howard's performance is very evocative of a B movie.
And it is. And this is a B movie. That, I think, is a point I was addressing. This is a creature feature that is straight to video and is way more interested in flexing its special effects department and ability than it is in developing really great characters or anything like that. Those things are absolutely secondary. I mean, they try to do the whole phobia of Seth Green's character from being in the woods, but they never really capitalize on it because, again, all of that is just contrived. They just want to put people in the woods with giant ticks so they can send their special effects at them. My argument is not defending the characters or the story. It is saying that the achievements in special effects are so well done for a straight-to-VHS creature feature that I think it raises this above average.
But is it still a hacker, Mr. Maynard?
It's a hacker with great special effects, which is the best. Which is the best kind of hacker.
Best kind of hacker.
How many hackers have we watched where you sit for half an hour and then it's some weird CGI plant monster coming after people, and you're just disappointed? This movie has no problem with letting you see its monsters. It doesn't try to shy away from it like Congo or The Bay. It's like, here's our monsters. They look good. They move well. You're gonna see them.
All right, we keep retreading the same ground. Ben, did you have another question for him, or Ryan?
No, that's it for me.
Ryan?
Nope, I'm good.
All right, gentlemen, it is now time for us to deliberate and pass sentence. Let's start with Ben.
All right. He had a heavy lift on this one, and he had, it's a shame that he did such a good job the first time. I do love the practical effects in this film. They're great, but there are plenty of great practical effects in many mystery science films that we would agree are bad. And, like comparing it to CGI, again, bad. You can have a good element in a bad film. So it does level it up against a lot of other bad movies we've seen, such as Freddy Got Fingered, but still. The story's flat, the ticks don't make sense, and I maintain that it is still forgettable. I have seen this film now twice, and I could not string together the scenes, from beginning to end. Nothing really sticks with you except for like the scene in the vet's office or the one at the end. Everything else, as far as character moments, you just lose them. So I am going to maintain my verdict of guilty. I'm sorry you did so well the first time, sir.
All right, Ryan Luis Rodriguez.
So last time I found this guilty, but I also harped on how much I love the practical effects. So I got to appreciate going in that direction with your appeal. However, I think that maybe you should be looking in a different direction. This is not a good... I didn't rewatch it for this case because I didn't watch anything for this case because I figured I could just knock it off, whatever. Who gives a crap? Whatever I say is not going to matter. But this is not a good movie. Like on any level. Like the effects are truly admirable, and I wish we could return to that era. God damn, do I wish we could go back. But there's no going home again. So I have to maintain that this is a bad movie. So I have to go guilty again.
All right. Well, when I was in the jury, I really put a premium on the special effects and the context, right? Like, it was direct to VHS. And the fact that Maynard brought in this new evidence with the marijuana farmers, which I really enjoy and kind of makes me actually want to watch Ticks again, you know. So I'm going to maintain my not guilty, even though I'm afraid that would not be enough to overturn today. So the decision in ROJ-20, The People versus Ticks, has been upheld. Ticks is still guilty of being a bad movie.
So, Mr. Maynard, take another year and study it, and come back to us with another year with more evidence, and maybe we'll.
I'm going to come back with composition and lighting.
Yes.
Bailiff, let us move on to our final case.
Our last case today is ROJ-147, Shrek 2 versus Paddington II. 2004, Shrek 2 follows the adventures of newlywed ogre Shrek as he tries to change himself to the better to suit his once human wife, Fiona. 2017's Paddington II shows us how the lives of Paddington and his loved ones were interrupted when the talking bear is framed for robbery of a peculiar pop-up book. The court previously rendered a verdict in favor of Shrek 2 being the superior movie.
Thank you, Bailiff. Mr. Second Time's the Charm, Ryan Luis Rodriguez, you are representing Paddington II. You may proceed with your exhibits.
Hi, guys. My name is Ryan Luis Rodriguez, and I am disappointed in this court. I have defended many great films like Tusk and other ones.
That's true.
And Paddington 2 is not the greatest movie that we've discussed in this court, and even the greatest movie that I've argued in defense of, that would be Toy Story 2. But Paddington 2 is one of those real disappointments for me. Like, I was bummed making that episode. I was so absolutely heartbroken by the decision. And a lot of it has to do with me not sticking up for myself and inserting commentary where I didn't. And one of the main issues is that I brought up that this is the second most highly rated film on Rotten Tomatoes. I believe it still holds a 99% approval rating. And while I acknowledge that that is an aggregate, that doesn't necessarily matter. The fact that the critical consensus is so strong, and Jeremy Black pointed out that Shrek 2 didn't have that kind of accolade, so he was basically fighting for the underdog. And I got to call bullshit on that, which I didn't then, and I should have, because Shrek 2 was the highest grossing movie of 2004. One of the highest grossing movies of all time, so in no way is it an underdog. Paddington 2, in that frame, is 100% an underdog. And I'm a sucker for a good immigrant story, and to have a character like Paddington who comes to this country, or not to this country, but comes to a country far from his own, and manages to make the lives of everyone around him better, even if there's a little resistance at first. Eventually everybody is broken down to seeing things the Paddington way. In fact, that's what I'm going to call it from now on. Whenever a movie is egregiously nice, it's doing things the Paddington way. I absolutely adore literally everything about this movie. I think that it's telling that this cost half as much as what Shrek 2 cost in 2004. We don't even figure in inflation or anything like that. And if you look at Shrek 2, it looks like dog diarrhea. It looks truly awful. Paddington 2 is made for like $45 million, and yet the main character is a fully CGI creation and has more life and pizzazz and has more soul to him than any single character in Shrek 2. And also, Shrek 2, in case I didn't mention this before, sucks. Fuck Shrek 2. It was dated the instant it came out because it ends with all the characters singing Livin' La Vida Loca to each other in 2004. This was not relevant 5 years in the past. How is it relevant now? I honestly, I don't know what to do with you people. You make me sick. This court makes me sick. I quit. I'm never coming back. Paddington 2 forever.
Well, you can't quit yet because we haven't made any decisions. Now, I remember that, I know you really don't care for Shrek 2, but that the playing around with story, like fairy tale elements, really gave a lot of illusion value to Shrek. So what would you say Paddington has to match that?
Well, I would honestly say that the work that it does with fairy tales is not even as nuanced and clever as it is in the first Shrek movie. I think that the further we get from that movie, which also sucks, the more that the vagaries are kind of left bare. And I don't think that Paddington 2 is trying to be that. I think we only put the two together because they both have the number 2 at the end of them. I honestly have no idea why Jeremy picked the way that he does, but I have no idea why he picks anything.
I'm convinced he watched him with his grandkids the week before.
The same weekend, yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
If you're listening, Jeremy, we love you. You can pick whatever movies you want. It's all good, brother.
Yeah.
I have a few exhibits that were put up against Paddington that didn't have rebuttals, and maybe you'd like to address them here. One was, apart from Hugh Grant, the supporting cast is very weak in Paddington 2, is in comparison to Shrek 2, which every character you remember.
Really? I remember the donkey, and I remember the green guy, and then there's the green girl.
Puss in Boots.
And the cat.
Puss in Boots.
And John Cleese.
Oh boy, Puss in Boots. He's in a much better movie. It's called Puss in Boots.
But not without Shrek 2 introducing him.
Oh, God. You people.
So anyway, Ryan, as you know, I'm very sympathetic towards Paddington 2. And if you recall in the jury deliberation, one of the things that was pointed out was that you did not hit Shrek 2 enough. And now it seems like you're kind of moving in that direction, but I would like you to hit something more specific than just, saying it looks bad and it's shit. Obviously, that's what you think. But what can you point to in the deficiencies of Shrek 2 that will sway us?
Well, I think it's, especially putting it against Paddington, it's insincere. It's couching everything in a sense of irony that doesn't really allow anything to actually register in a way that if you think about it 5 years, 10 years from now, are you really thinking about any individual moment of Shrek 2 that made you think, oh, yeah, film can do that? There's no examples of that in Shrek 2 whatsoever. It's just a movie. You watch it with your kids. When it's done, you're done processing it. It has left you. It is ephemera. It is meaningless. But Paddington 2 contains in it just simple life lessons that I don't think we have in children's entertainment anymore. And the fact that it actually works for a sizable portion of the adult audience, I think really speaks to its commonality with our culture. And the fact that it is English and therefore foreign to us, the fact that this can connect with as many people as it does across many spectrums, I think is the most ringing endorsement I can give of the film.
But wouldn't you say Shrek 2 has cross-generational appeal? Like, there's certainly jokes that only adults will get in Shrek 2 that make, I think, the film more enjoyable to them, while I think the story in general is still geared to kids. Doesn't Paddington 2 seem like it's a lot more for kids and then the few adults in us that really love that kind of wholesome content? I hate wholesome content myself, but...
I knew you did.
I disagree.
I
wholeheartedly disagree. I think the fact that they send the character to prison is a good indication that they're not necessarily going for just the kid audience. Because no kid is sitting there going, yeah, I remember when I went to prison, it was rough. Because they're kids.
Unless that kid is really cool.
Unless they're like, they're 30 and they're wearing a backwards baseball cap. And they're like, no, but I'm a kid. I swear. I didn't kill that person.
But does Paddington really face true adversity when he's in prison? I mean, he's never shanked. He's never challenged by a rival gang.
Well, why would you put that in a movie? Who are you?
Because that's what happens in prison.
Who the hell are you?
In prison. That's what happens in prison.
So, I'd like to move into a more serious direction, because during the case, something that was brought up about Shrek 2 was that it has a bit more of a harder edge that Paddington 2 doesn't, in that there are some lessons to be learned in the hard way, like Shrek changing himself to be human to try to fit in and it not working out, or even whether he should even do it, that kind of internal conflict, so that there is some meat to Shrek. It's not just all women's underwear jokes. And then Paddington 2, as you pointed out in the case, he's a very aspirational character, right? So he's like close to like a Jesus kind of character.
Oh, so he is Jesus. He is the Lord.
So we do have, I think, some good contrast in the lessons we can take away from this movie. Are you saying that Shrek 2 just is devoid of those lessons, or that Paddington 2's lessons are better? Could you explain a little more on that?
Yeah, I think Shrek 2 is too abrasive for that stuff to actually land properly. I don't think that, I mean, there's lessons being given, but I don't think that they're being registered. I don't think that an adult sitting through that movie, when they walk out of it, goes, yeah, I felt really good about the way that Shrek handled that situation. Nobody's doing that. Absolutely nobody walks out of Shrek 2 and goes, you know what? I learned a powerful lesson. And even though they are shoehorning it in there, they are trying to make you think that this is a film as opposed to content. But with Paddington 2, the subtext is the text. Like the whole point of the character is to put you into somebody else's shoes, and it hits that point from the beginning to the end without being cloying or without being saccharine. It's very sincere in a way that I think Shrek 2 fails to be.
All right. Gentlemen, do you have any more questions for Ryan Luis Rodriguez?
No, I think
I'm all right.
I'm good, yeah.
All right, then. Then let us deliberate and start making some decisions. Big Ben Haslar, I'd like to hear from you.
Well, much like Ryan, this is my chance to go back in time and fix a previous wrong. He didn't go after Shrek 2 in the original case. Now he did. I do think that Shrek 2 is fine. I do think that his lessons are fine, but they are aimed more towards a younger audience. Paddington 2 sticks with me more, even after this time. These were the two films that I actually did not rewatch for this appeals process, because I didn't really feel like I needed to. They both are memorable. They both stick with me, but Paddington 2 sticks with me on a whole different level with its wholesomeness, but it's not completely wholesome. It does like shine a light with the characters of Knuckles and like how he reforms the prison with just by being a good person. I think that while it is aspirational, it's not fair to compare the two. Paddington 2 manages to hit its marks a whole lot more, although I do agree that the supporting cast, they're very forgettable. Only Paddington, Hugh Grant, and Knuckles stick with me. But, you don't need that. It's a very episodic series. So I will overturn it and go to Paddington 2.
Very well. Maynard Bangs.
I know Ryan really feels so strongly about this case. I think Shrek 2 is a whole lot better than he's giving credit for. I think especially in the light of Shrek 1. I think it's really playing with the storyline of the first one, putting Shrek in Fiona's shoes opposite.
It's got a kaiju gingerbread man.
It does have that, but I think there really is some great growth in the Shrek character once he's forced to go through what Fiona went through, vice versa. I think there's a lot to that there. Paddington is, I know Ryan said, I think he said that it wasn't, to me, it's very saccharine. I mean, Paddington is just so nice that nobody can stand doing anything bad to him. And that's a bigger fairy tale than anything you'll see in Shrek 2. And there are people out there that it does not matter how nice you are to them. They will shank you. And it's shank or be shanked. And so Paddington just so effortlessly seems to breeze through all his problems that it's kind of hard to have any stakes, because he's like Superman with niceness. He's got so many nice powers. He's just going to crush everything. But I still think the films are very close. I could flip a coin and I probably would be fine with me. They both stick with me. I think Paddington 2 stuck with me more than I expected it to. But it does have some really great visuals. And because we love Ryan so much and I don't want him to quit, I'll go with Paddington 2.
I would love the idea that he just stuck with us for so long to master engineer this whole appeals process, and then that would be the moment he quits.
Right. So I understand Ryan's passion and I think he's being mighty uncharitable to Shrek 2. However, that's kind of the nature of these head-to-heads. I mean, that was a very contentious case. Normally, our head-to-heads were a lot more, two fine films, and that one got a little hot. But I got to tell you, I was in the bag for Paddington 2 the whole time, and I do like Shrek 2. I think Shrek 2 is a very strong sequel. That is what sequels should do. They should expand the world, expand the characters. And I have only ever seen Paddington 2 in a vacuum. I haven't seen the first Paddington. I should see the first Paddington, but Paddington
we watched
2
the first Paddington.
Nope, just Paddington 2. And it holds up so well. It's such a strong movie by itself. Like, it doesn't even have to be, a sequel, like you could just jump into the movie and fall in love with this character. And I remember after watching it, I texted Ryan and I said, I don't know how you're going to lose. This movie was everything. I absolutely loved it. I can't wait to watch it with my kids. And it's going to be so much fun to talk about on the show. And so nothing's changed my mind. And Ryan's passion is just re-emboldened my love for that movie. So we are unanimous in overturning this. So the decision in ROJ-147, Shrek 2 versus Paddington 2, has been overturned. Paddington 2 is hereby declared to be the superior movie.
Boo!
And gentlemen, court is adjourned.
This is Grumbly Grumblerson reporting to you from outside the reels of justice. This has been a momentous day in the history of our hallowed courtroom. I assume I haven't been here the whole time. Where not one, not two, but somehow 3 previous decisions have been overturned, forever rocking the foundation of the cinematic legal system as long as it contains to us. But that's all we have in the courthouse today. Let's go back to the studio for some damn post-trial analysis.
We did it. We did it, boys. The appeals of justice. Every single guest has asked about appeals. I'm not even kidding. I mean, it is,
and none of them were referenced in this episode.
That's
not
also
a
true.
Single one.
Well, I think we can agree. We found the process very appealing.
Oh, boo!
Well, yeah.
Anyway, we got to do recommendations here.
All right. Well,
did you have a final thought you wanted to let off your chest there, Schlender? Something?
No. I'll just say, it was fun. It was a fun format, and
I'm sure it was fun for everybody who got their movie overturned, but for some of us,
for you chose the hard lift for drama, and I appreciate it.
You got to maintain your prosecution win, though. So
I at least got to redeem. That's true. I won either way.
You were going to win either way, yeah. I mean, I won with Showgirls too, actually. So, I mean, I did the same trick you did.
That's true, but yours worked. Damn it. Anyway, so we always ask for recommendations, so we'll just jump right into it. Big Ben, what's your recommendation? Your season finale recommendation?
Yes. And because it's a different episode, I'm going to take the opportunity to recommend something different. But it is on Letterboxd, and that's my barometer for what counts, even though this is a show. If I told you there were such a thing existed as Kaiju Meets the X-Files, and you weren't interested, well, I'd question why you were listening to our little show. But that's the description I think of that perfectly fits the Japanese series from the 60s, Ultra Q. It is perhaps more well-known for being the predecessor of Ultraman, a series that I still haven't seen because Ultra Q left such a delicious taste in my mouth. I'm almost terrified Ultraman will wash it out. Ultra Q follows a team of investigators as they delve into the realms of the paranormal, some of which involve modified monsters of well-known movies, and sometimes being straight up paranormal activity. Ultra Q is streaming on Tubi and Pluto, although I can't vouch for the quality there, though I'm sure they're fine. But for my money, thanks to the recommendation of one Rob Maynard, I picked up that Blu-ray, which was remastered, and those episodes looked absolutely stunning.
Great Blu-ray. Great Blu-ray.
There's a few great Blu-ray sets where you should be able to pick them up pretty easily. So I think even on Amazon, probably the Blu-ray set's $20-$30, if that.
I think I paid $17 for it, honestly.
Yeah, no, they keep dropping those Ultraman sets. They're very affordable.
It's ironically about the same price as Twilight Zone, which this is very much similar to.
Yep, and Ben, if you need more, I think in the early 2000s there was Ultra Q Dark Fantasy. So
is it as good as the others? Because for the same reason for Ultraman, I'm scared of it wiping that taste out.
I haven't watched the others, but I'd say that timeline of 2004 is a very strong time for tokusatsu. Like, suits are still used. It hasn't gone all CGI. So I would have high optimism for it. And then I think there's another Ultra Q. I think it might be called Neo Ultra Q. There's another one, but I can't remember what year that is. But those are some other ones for you to check out and then let me know how those are. They might be cool. Let's go to Schlenzo. What's your recommendation?
All right, thank you. For our special, I have to recommend a movie that critics said Charlie Bronson was too old for, and this was even before he started working with the greatest director of all time, J. Lee Thompson, and that movie is Hard Times. From 1975, the directorial debut of Walter Hill, viewers are transported to the gritty streets of New Orleans during the Great Depression, where bare-knuckle street fighting serves as both a means of survival and escape from the harsh realities of life. In addition to Charlie Bronson, it also stars James Coburn as charismatic as ever. This compelling drama showcases the indomitable spirit of its characters as they navigate a world filled with struggle, betrayal, and unexpected camaraderie. With a perfect, grimy Depression atmosphere, authentic performances, and a story that packs a powerful punch, Hard Times is a gripping experience that immerses audiences in a bygone era of raw and unyielding determination. This film is just one of the many bricks in the House of Bronson. It goes a long way to show the kind of actor he was: brutal, inefficient, but not without an odd form of masculine grace. They don't make movies like this anymore because they don't make men like Bronson anymore.
How beautiful.
One of the many bricks in the House of Bronson. How do you come up with this poetry? Like, your reviews are so flowery. I love it.
Well, I honestly,
it's only about Charlie Bronson.
I listened to Ryan's recommendations and I try to use that as the template because he uses great language in his.
I just write Ultra Q, watch it, done.
No, but my recommendations used to be like that. If you go back to earlier episodes, and I just had to start up in my game.
And that's actually the Big Boss Man's favorite Charlie Bronson movie.
It probably is. I mean, it's a very good movie. It could even be Walter Hill's best movie, but that's actually The Warriors.
Because you'll be serving
Streets of Fire, man. Streets of Fire.
Oh, God, Streets of Fire is good, too. Anyway, I recommend.
You have to know the Big Boss Man's theme music for that to make sense.
I just thought he liked bare knuckle boxing in New Orleans.
Well, he would actually.
DC.
So my recommendation this week would make a superb double feature with my last recommendation, Sisu, because it's again a film about killing Nazis who are trying to take your gold. The appropriately named Blood and Gold from 2023. Set in the spring of 1945, a German deserter looks for retribution against his former comrades as they attempt to take possession of a rumored Jewish treasure. Much like Sisu, a whole bunch of Nazis get what's coming to them in this one, but tonally the two are quite different. Blood and Gold has some awesome action, but a lot less stylized. And it does have some larger-than-life villainous Nazis. You know, there's a guy with half his face missing, probably from cyanide. But again, the violence is less stylized, and it's less so one man against a bunch of Nazis than a group of citizens or otherwise adventurous individuals who are also trying to get the treasure, who are trying to foil their plans. But it is definitely worth a watch. It is in German, but don't worry, you'll get the subtitles on there. And I hope this trend of fucking up gold-stealing Nazis continues, because I'm totally here for it. Blood and Gold is currently streaming on Netflix, so borrow someone's password.
You know, it's another movie about Nazi gold. Cabo Blanco, starring Charlie Bronson, directed by J. Lee Thompson, and
that's my next recommendation.
Yeah. Save it for next season.
No, it's already been recommended. I've recommended all 9 of them already.
I'm doing it again. Ryan, why don't you send us on home for the season?
My recommendation this week will be considered a somewhat controversial title, so I want whoever is editing this to include a bleep whenever I quote it, because I do not approve. From 1971, it's the cinematic iconoclast Rainer Werner Fassbinder and his film, Beware of a Holy I love movies about making movies, and this features a contentious group of German filmmakers in a Spanish hotel, drinking Cuba Libres, waiting for their director to arrive, and basically treating each other like garbage. They don't even start making the movie until the last 5 minutes. You are trapped with these people as their sociopathy begins to grow and fester. It is pretty miserable but hypnotic in its own way. I've been making my way through Fassbinder's filmography, and this might be my very favorite so far. The man made 40 movies before dying at the age of 37, so it's gonna take a while. Thankfully, Criterion has released plenty of them on Blu-ray with a substantial collection on Criterion Channel, where you can also stream Beware of a Holy...
Wow, the word under that bleep is way different than you're expecting it to be.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you're gonna have to do some hard Googling.
yeah. It's multisyllabic. It's weird. I think it might be foreign. I'm not sure.
But it's also a word that we said in the show a couple times already. But okay.
Is it? No, you'll have to go back and listen to every single word we said, because one of them is the word that's beeped. And with that, we're all out of show for this week and this season. But we'd like to thank everybody who has joined us for our past 3 seasons. We hope you'll join us again next season, because it's literally just next week.
3 more seasons.
Exactly.
3 more seasons. 3 more seasons.
As the reels of justice keep turning.
Count it.
Appeals!
Oh, no, we're just going to bleepy that, I think.
Yeah, just bleep it.
That might be funny.
Yeah, might be funny. Like he said it again. That's great.
Please follow us on Twitter at Reels of Justice, Instagram Reels of Justice, and Facebook.com/Reels of Justice.